Well, depending on what day you're watching this, or perhaps even what time of the day you're watching it, the question of whether or not the North Korea summit is on or off is going to be up in the air until it either happens or it doesn't. And a lot of people are saying this is due to Donald Trump's lack of organization and his constant ability to simply shoot off his mouth and not follow through on promises, while I maintain that it is an act of absolute statesmanship, and not just statesmanship, just fundamental common sense. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is your Right Angle, brought to you by members of BillWhittle.com. And the question today is, what exactly is happening with the summit with North Korea, and why did he cancel it, and why is it back on again? And to me, gents, it's actually pretty simple. Donald Trump, as we talked about a few weeks ago, changed the equation, made it clear that these ongoing nuclear tests are not going to be put up with the way they have been for the last God knows how many years. And that put Kim Jong-un in a position of deciding whether or not he wants to be overthrown by his own generals by not being tough enough, or whether he wants to go to war with America. And that's not likely to end well either, not with a president whose first act was to drop the mother of all bombs on the ISIS people that were giving us trouble and no longer are so much. So he decided, well, you could be a statesman. And Donald Trump gave Kim Jong-un actually quite a big present, quite a big gift in order to get the summit and bring peace. And the gift was, I'm going to allow you, a tin-pot dictator of the most poverty-stricken Stalinist place in the world, the worst place in the world, I'm going to give you the opportunity to sit at the table with the President of the United States, and we'll speak as equal leaders of two countries. So the summit was on. Looked like we had a peace treaty in the making instead of this armistice that's been going on 70 years now or something. And then, as soon as this deal was brokered and the date was set, Kim Jong-un started talking all kinds of trash about America and trash about Trump and so on. And Donald Trump wrote, or had written, doesn't matter, it came from the office of the president, over his signature, one of the most remarkable letters I've ever read, expressing basically great respect, His Excellency Kim Jong-un, and so on. Dear Mr. President, I was looking forward to this. I thought it was in the interest of both our countries and a bright future ahead of us, and so on and so on and so on. However, due to the anger and the outright hostility you expressed in public over the last press conference you gave, I don't think it would be in the interest of the United States to meet at this time. Best regards, Donald Trump. Now, Scott, the left has gone absolutely bonkers over this. They don't know whether or not it's like, well, was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? It's got to be Trump's fault somehow. But by telling him it's not on, he did something very, very important, didn't he? Something really smart and something essential.
Absolutely. And I think anybody who's ever had any role in the business of selling will understand this intuitively. Even if the biggest thing you ever did was sell Girl Scout cookies, I think you have some sense of what goes on in the sales process. And for some reason, I think that the journalism profession must be replete with people who have never sold anything to anybody.
They're not very bright.
Yeah, they're just not business people. They don't understand. And I don't mean to exalt Donald Trump as some masterful business person. I actually take a somewhat dim view of some of his previous business experience before he became president. However, in this case, what he is doing here makes total sense, because the key to negotiations for anybody is called walkaway power. If you have walkaway power, then you have a chance of making a deal that is favorable to you and to your interest. If you lack walkaway power, you will pay the highest price possible and virtually hand over any concessions that you had hoped to garner to your opponent or to the other party in the negotiation. And by this politely worded letter, President Trump has basically said to the North Korean dictator, I don't have to have this meeting now. I don't have to have this meeting at all. You're the one who needs this meeting. And he very, very politely said so. And I thought it was brilliant. And when the whole media was exploding with, oh my goodness, we're not going to have a meeting, I suddenly realized the problem with the left and with the media is they think a meeting is something. President Trump does not think a meeting is something. President Trump thinks that a treaty or an agreement or an enforceable set of principles, a deal is something. The meeting is not something. Like, nobody comes back from a business trip and says to their boss, hey, how did it go? Oh, yeah, I had 12 meetings. Really, how did it go? Oh, Well, I didn't make any sales. Oh, really? And you're still
fired.
here. You're still thinking you're going to use that desk, are you? So, that's the difference between the real world and the world of media and politics, is that the real world sees a deal as the thing, and the media people see talking about a deal as a thing.
That's a really profound observation. That's right.
That
It's
is.
exactly right. It is the left's continuing obsession that the appearance of a thing is the same as the thing. And it ain't necessarily so. Now, Steve, the story has legs because, we had a deal. We're looking forward to it. The Korean presidents have shaken hands. Maybe we'll put an end to this nightmare after all. And then the deal's off. And then the deal's back on again. Apparently, a North Korean representative, as Scott said in our pregame show, was in a holding pattern over the Pacific for several days. And then the next thing you know, he's visiting and the deal is back on. Now, this tells me something, Steve. It tells me that the president was going to give Kim Jong-un an opportunity out of the mess he's in. Kim Jong-un decided that he was going to talk trash about America because that's what's rewarded in the past, is talking trash about America. Donald Trump then canceled the meeting. And now the meeting's back on again, which tells me that something has happened. And it tells me that what has happened is Donald Trump has received personal evidence that Kim Jong-un is going to behave himself. I hate to put it so simply, but it's really just that clear. He said, "You want to be a jerk about this? Fine, deal's off." The deal's back on again. It's on again because Kim did something. And the something I think that he did was he basically apologized and said, "Okay, I want the deal. Now the deal's back on again." If you do this often enough, you may not have any nuclear-equipped tyrannical murderers who are starving their own people to death and threatening the rest of the world peace. You could try this against the Iranians, and God knows what might happen. Wait a minute. He's already done that, hasn't he?
Oh yeah, I kind of like this part. I'm liking this a lot. We can't talk about how the deal is going without talking about how we got here. This is really important. When the Soviet Union collapsed, not because the Cold War ended, as the left likes to say, but because we won the Cold War. We knocked their you-know-whats in the dirt in 1991. Anyway, North Korea lost their subsidies from the Soviet Union. They spent a lot of the 90s in a huge famine where about 1 in 11 North Koreans died. The surviving population is stunted and malnourished. You look at the north-south divide, and it's not just that famous satellite photo where the south at night is all lit up, and in North Korea there's one little pinprick of light where the capital is, and the rest is just blanketed in darkness. But Seoul, South Korea, looks like this crazy, wicked, futuristic city that maybe you built in Sim City, back in the 90s, just out there, crazy, rich, and awesome. And North Korea is a 7th century feudalism with a 20th century army kind of bolted on top of it, reinforced concrete everywhere. It's just the most miserable hellhole on the earth. And so the original Kim got himself out of this famine by starting a nuclear program and egging Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright on to negotiate with him. And Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright didn't have walkaway power. They wanted to make a deal. They wanted to be seen making a deal. And they made a really bad deal. North Korea got over its famine. It kept the Kim family in power. And flash forward to 2006. Oh, it turns out instead of stopping their nuclear program in exchange for aid like they said they would, they detonated a nuclear bomb on President Bush's watch in 2006. And suddenly we have no walkaway power, and here we are back at the table. Then they spent the Obama administration launching missile after missile, detonating nuke after nuke, until they finally had to abandon their nuclear site because they dug such a hole underground with their dang nukes. So we are in a position where we don't like to negotiate with terrorists. It's against our policy. It's against our better judgment. But because we've had 3 administrations, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, kicked the can down the road to the point where Kim has bought himself a seat at the negotiating table. Now, we happen to have the good fortune to have a president in office right now who might just be the only guy in the world crazy enough to make this work. Because as Scott said, Trump doesn't want to sit at the table. Trump wants to put an end to this nonsense that 3 other presidents tacitly encourage. So I don't know if this thing is going to work. I don't know if a deal can be made. What I do know is that after 20 years of can kicking, we might finally be able to do something about this odious regime and the nukes that they can threaten us with. And I can't believe this turn of events, but I sure do welcome it, Bill, and I hope everybody else does too. Except I know that they don't.
I've said this so many times on so many different subjects, it bears saying again on this one. I didn't come into the world with conservative beliefs and then start looking for evidence to back up my premeditated assumptions. I try to look and see what's true, and if something seems to be evidence for something, I'm going to move there. So, does this idea of walkaway power have any merit? As Steve just pointed out, we've been negotiating and negotiating and negotiating in order to get a photo opportunity for 20 years, and all it's done is increase the threat. Let's look back just into recent history, why don't we? Ronald Reagan met Gorbachev in Reykjavik. He said he had a list of things that he wanted. Gorbachev had a list of things that he wanted, and it was announced to the world that they had agreed to basically take away this nuclear threat that had hung over every one of us who's old enough to remember the idea that we're not going to have a next year. There's not going to be a next year. This was all on the table, ready to go, and Ronald Reagan walked away from the deal because he would not give up SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. He wouldn't give it up. And he walked away from the deal. And everybody in the world, myself included, said that was the last chance we had. And I guess it's all over. Little did I know that Ronald Reagan had decided that since the Soviets are good at making tanks but not good at making anything else, why don't we beat them economically rather than fight them militarily? And the ability to walk away from the one weapon we had, which was to commit the Soviets to spending the kind of money that we had for Star Wars, whether it worked or not, ended the Cold War and freed millions of people, by the way. Freed millions of people.
Yeah.
And likewise in Vietnam. Negotiations back and forth. Peace treaty negotiations back and forth, and we keep subsidizing ongoing war. That's what we're paying for. Until finally Richard Nixon decides, you know what, I bet if we started bombing Hanoi, this problem would resolve itself rather quickly. And once they started bombing Hanoi, and as Steve pointed out, Linebacker 2, I think they came to the table within 72 hours, and we're no longer talking about the size of the table. Now we're talking about whether there will be a table in one piece when we have these negotiations. And all of a sudden, it focuses the mind, doesn't it? Focuses the mind. So you subsidize what you subsidize, you get more of. And I'm just so happy to see, for the first time, dealing with the Palestinians, dealing with the Iranians, and dealing with the North Koreans, for the first time in a long time, we have a president who is negotiating almost as if he was representing the most powerful force in the history of the world, rather than going hand in hand to tin pot dictators in order to appease them so that we can look like the noble souls that we simply are. And when you actually are, you get to walk away from bad people. It's in your interest to do so. That's why I'm a conservative, and you would be too if you had half a willingness to examine your basic principles, but we'll leave that alone for the time being. Thank you very much for the paying members who make all this possible. There are a few small number of people who pay for these shows so that you don't have to, and if you feel like that's somehow unfair, it is. So come and join us. We'd be happy to have you. For Steve and Scott and the rest of the Right Angle team, which is me and a couple other people, thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you next week.